Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Dolkart. I'm one of the three co-founders and co-directors of the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project, and we're here in Christopher Park in Greenwich Village, across from the Stonewall Inn, for a Jane's Walk, and we're only a few blocks from where Jane Jacobs lived in Greenwich Village. So, and one of the things that Jacobs loved about Greenwich Village was the diversity of the neighborhood. And so one of the ideas behind the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project is to add a layer of diversity to discussions of the architecture of New York City. All of the founders and everyone involved with this project is involved in historic preservation, and we all believe very strongly in the power of place. But what we wanted to do was add a layer of queer history to the usual histories of the city. Both famous buildings and obscure vernacular buildings. And so we're going to look at a few buildings today, just in this general vicinity. We're not going to actually walk very far, but we're going to do it live. And so before we get really started, I'm going to turn it over to Christiana Pena, who's our social media guru, and she's going to give you the logistics.
So as Andrew said, we're here in Greenwich Village. We're going to be walking around about 10-15 minutes or so. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. If you want to know some of the LGBT history of some of the sites that we walk past and others that maybe are familiar to you, let us know. You certainly know where we are, just across the street from the Stonewall Inn. And Andrew, right, that's not necessarily going to be the focus of our talk today, but people can certainly head to nyclgbtsites.org for more history about that very important LGBT historic site.
So actually, we're going to talk. I think it's going to take a little bit more than 10 or 15
minutes.
That's
fine.
I think more like
it's a
20 or 30
day.
minutes. Yes, it's a beautiful day, and I wish you could all be here with me next year. Of course, you'll be able to. So just first of all, a word about the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project. Beyond what I've already said, our idea is to make an invisible history visible, and we're doing that by using the built fabric of New York. We have a spectacular website, so you should all check that out if you're not familiar with it. And please ask questions, and Christiana will tell me what the questions are, and I'll try to answer them. So we're here in Christopher Park, not too far from Sheridan Square, which is about half a block away. And just a little background as to why Stonewall Inn was here, why Julius's Bar was here, why the Duchess, a lesbian bar, was here, and other LGBT-related sites. In the early 20th century, Greenwich Village became a major center for gay and lesbian people in New York, but mostly around Washington Square. There were a lot of lesbian bars on 3rd Street, for example, and the edge of Washington Square was a major cruising site, but by the post-war period, gay life in New York began moving west in Greenwich Village, and by the 1960s, this area around here had really become the center of that. And there were a number of bars here, mafia-run bars, as were most of the bars in New York, and then, of course, by the 1970s and 80s, Christopher Street, which is just across the street, became the center of gay life in New York. So we're just going to touch on a few sites in this area that are part of this development of this part of Greenwich Village as a major center. So we're across the street from the Stonewall Inn. Stonewall is under scaffolding at the moment, so there's really not very much to see. And I don't really want to reiterate the story of Stonewall, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But one of the things that we at the Sites Project are really interested in is, one, how Stonewall was a transition in the gay rights movement, and what happened immediately after, and also the fact that there was extensive gay life in New York before Stonewall. And so we're going to touch on both of those issues here. So, in fact, on the first issue of the impact of Stonewall, one historian has noted that before Stonewall there were about 50 gay and lesbian groups in America, and within a year after Stonewall, there were about 2,000 queer organizations in New York. So you can see the impact that it had. And in fact, a month after Stonewall, in June of 1969, there was a demonstration here in Christopher Park, where several hundred people came to this demonstration to protest the way the police had behaved during the Stonewall uprising. And so this became a major center and major focus for gay life and gay protest. And in fact, a year after Stonewall, the first Christopher Street Liberation Day March took place. What was the roots of the Gay Pride Parade, which will be 51 years old this year. And it began just around the corner. So this was a really important symbolic site around Stonewall, and it's also the reason why, if we come over here, why the gay liberation sculpture by George Siegel is here in Christopher Park. This sculpture was designed in the late 1970s, but it wasn't put up until the early 1990s because there was so much opposition to it in Greenwich Village. At the time, the community board in Greenwich Village was quite homophobic. Somebody came to a community board meeting and said, well, we can't have this because people are going to be having sex in front of the statue. So it took a long time for this to appear. And now it's part of the national park here. So Stonewall is one of the first gay sites to be recognized in America. It was on the 30th anniversary of the Stonewall uprising. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the federal listing of significant sites. It was the first site specifically listed for its queer significance. And it was done by those of us who later founded the Sites Project. And then it became a National Historic Landmark in the year 2000. And then it wasn't until only about 5 or 6 years ago that it became a New York City landmark, an individual landmark. And then under President Obama, it became the Stonewall National Historic Site. And Christopher Park is actually owned by the federal government and is now the National Memorial is here. So I think that gives you a kind of introduction to the area. So we're gonna walk just across the street. Actually, before we go, just across the street, just down the block from Stonewall, at number 59, was the final headquarters of the Mattachine Society. And this is a really interesting and important transition because the Mattachine Society was the first gay rights organization in America. It was founded on the West Coast in the early 1950s and then later opened a branch here in New York. And the founders of the Mattachine did some really courageous events, civil rights events, and we'll talk about one of them in a little while. But basically, they were pretty conservative. At all of their all of their protests, the men dressed in jackets and ties, and the women dressed in dresses.
There was a dress code.
There was a dress code, absolutely. And so their final headquarters here in the 1970s was on the second floor of 59 Christopher Street. And it's really ironic that it's only a few doors down from Stonewall because it was the aftermath of Stonewall that actually eventually supersedes Mattachine. Other more activist and more radical groups like the Gay Activists Alliance and Radical Lesbians develop, and Mattachine basically goes out of business.
Mm-hmm. Well, and not only the Mattachine building here at 59, but also the flagpole at the tip of the park are really perfect examples of how there are these sites that we walk by every day and are not aware of the invisible history, which just speaks to the mission of the project.
Yeah, the flagpole is a memorial to one of the first officers killed in the Civil War, and it was an incredibly handsome officer, and there is some evidence that he and Abraham Lincoln may have had a thing going between the two of them.
All right, I'm following you.
Okay, so we're just going to go across 4th Street.
If you have any questions, definitely drop them in the comments. I will ask Andrew. Happy to take your questions.
So we're right by where the Christopher Street stop on the number 1 train, and this was a really key spot, especially in the 1970s and 80s, when this was the heart of gay Greenwich Village. You know, people from all over pouring out of the subway station. And there are still a number of bars here. The Monster, which is here on the left, and the Duplex,
Yep.
a music bar. And Marie's Crisis also. So these are.
There's so many sites we can point to and discuss.
Yeah. So this continues to be a sort of major hub of gay life in Greenwich Village, even though Greenwich Village is no longer the center of gay life in the city. So we're here at the corner of Grove and 7th Avenue South, and what is just a small 5-story building, which now has a Two Boots Pizza in it. And this was the site of the Duchess, which was a really important lesbian bar most lesbian bars, like most gay men's bars, were mafia owned until the 1970s, and the Duchess was one of the early examples of a lesbian bar that was owned by the community. And unlike most of the earlier lesbian bars, this one was very popular with women in the women's movement, in the lesbian rights movement, so it was sometimes referred to as a movement bar. It was very small. It didn't have much to offer except for camaraderie. There are a number of autobiographies that talk about how out on the street there was a lot of homophobia, but you walked in to the Duchess and it was being like home. Interestingly, it closed because the women's movement demanded that a lot of private places, like private clubs, admit women, so that a lot of the men's clubs, like the University Club and the Century Association, were forced to admit women. And because of these non-discrimination laws, the Duchess fell foul to that because they didn't want to allow men. And there was a lawsuit, and they lost their liquor license. So they closed, and then a series of other lesbian bars opened in this site, and the last of which was called Pandora's Box, which had a large African American and Hispanic audience, and eventually it closed as well. So we're just going to go look next door, where there's not much to see. There's a big sidewalk cafe, and this is a 1920s garage. That's now the boucherie, and if it actually says garage up on the top, it's a little hidden by the plastic flowers that they have. This was one of many buildings that were built after 7th Avenue was pushed through when the subway was built, and there was a lot of demolition. In the 1960s, this became the home of the Circle Repertory Theater, which was founded by a number of people that had really started out at Cafe Chino, which was the birthplace of off-Broadway and gay theater. And Lanford Wilson, the playwright, for example, was involved, and Marshall Mason, the director, were involved with Circle Rep. And this became one of the first off-Broadway theaters that did a lot of plays with LGBT themes. And so this is a really important site in the history of gay theater. The 5th of July, for example, which later moves to Broadway and was one of the first plays on Broadway with a gay theme and actually a same-sex kiss. So there are a number of sites in Greenwich Village that are really important for their off-Broadway theater history, and this is one that's very closely associated with gay theater. Okay, so we are going to just walk back
to the
over
island? while we walk, we have a question that I hope I can do it justice. All right, so Andrew from C. Compush asks, do you believe the fabric historically as a hub for LGBTQ life is still embedded in the neighborhood? Is it still a draw for younger generations?
Well, I think there are two parts to that question. I don't think Greenwich Village is as much a draw for the younger generation as Hell's Kitchen, for example, which now has a lot of bars that welcome welcome younger people, much like the bars in Greenwich Village did in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. But I do think that the gay history is embedded in the fabric here, and sometimes it's evident, and sometimes you have to search for it, and that's exactly what the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project is trying to do, is to make that invisible history visible. Yeah. And you would walk by the building where the Circle Repertory Theater is, and you would never ever think that there was anything significant about the building. You'd say, "Oh yeah,
Duchess as well.
Let's just tear that thing down."
Yeah.
But it has a really rich cultural history that's very closely associated with gay history. Or there's a Taboots Pizza here where there were a series of really important lesbian bars. So one has to tease it out, but the physical fabric is still there.
Great, thank you.
So I think we'll just go across 4th Street back to the edge of Christopher Park.
Okay. You really can stand at this intersection and do a 360-degree turn and hit so many LGBT historic sites.
Absolutely. So across the street from where we're standing is a 2-story Art Deco taxpayer. A taxpayer is a building that was built basically to pay the taxes until they assumed something larger would be built on the site. This was built early in the 1930s. There was an apartment building planned for this site. The Depression came, the apartment building idea died, so they put this up. And it became the site of Stewart's, which was a cafe, and that attracted a significant gay crowd to it. It was on the ground floor, and it had large picture windows, and it attracted a particularly flamboyant group of men, some of whom were dressing in drag, or at least as drag as you could legally at the time, and it attracted tourists who would sometimes come in and also congregate out on the street and watch the goings-on inside. In fact, the gay artist Paul Cadmus did a famous picture here, which
I'm going to try to share
Christiane is going to try to share. Do we have it?
I did it.
So especially look at the right-hand side of the picture, and you can see looking straight out at you is what is clearly a rather made-up gay man going into the men's room and inviting you to join him in there. And you can see it's a raucous crowd in there. Well, there were complaints about this, and the district attorney's office investigated those complaints, and I'm going to read you what the DA's office wrote, that there were certain persons of the homosexual type and certain persons of the lesbian type who to remain therein engage in acts of sapphism and diverse other lewd, obscene, indecent, and disgusting acts, and that it's a rendezvous for perverts, degenerates, homosexuals, and other evil-disposed persons. So, of course, that language is so comic to us today, but this was really serious. This was the way queer people were viewed in the 1930s when this happened. So Stewart's was closed down as a degenerate location, and it reopened as a cafe called the Life Cafe, which had a similar reputation. So it was basically rejuvenated as the same thing. So, and then later, it became the site of one of the first gay gyms, gay-associated gyms in New York, and that was much later in the 1970s. But so you have this beautiful Art Deco taxpayer in the heart of Greenwich Village that has this really interesting gay history that's evident both in the stories and in the art of Paul Cadmus. Also, Marlon Brando wrote about his experience there. He saw all these crowds here. At the time, Marlon Brando, of course, was bisexual. And he went in to find out what was going on. And he writes about how most of the people that were inside were performing for the people outside.
Yeah.
That it became a kind of performance venue. Okay, so we're gonna actually stop at one more place, but we have to go around the corner. We're gonna head to Julius's and talk about one of the really courageous actions of the Mattachine Society.
Yeah.
So if you have questions,
Now's a good time.
now's a good time to ask them.
Rainbow Crosswalk.
If you go onto our website, we start with a map, and we have color-coded little squares on the map that indicate where we have a site, and you'll see that there's like this cluster of overlapping squares around Greenwich Village. But as you zoom in, you can see the individual sites, and we have many sites in Greenwich Village, and in the days when one can do walking tours with all of you,
Yeah.
the Sites Project has several routes through Greenwich Village that we like to do. One in the Washington Square area, several others in the West Village, and you get to see the richness and the diversity of LGBT life in the neighborhood.
Can you tell us a little bit about your process? How is it that the knowledge that Stewart's Cafeteria was an LGBT historic site is something in the oral history that then you go to find additional sources that document it? What's the process of identifying and fleshing out the history of these overlooked sites?
Well, we're trying to be as academic as possible. We don't want our site to be all about rumors.
Hearsay and gossip.
So we use research by historians. We've done an extensive amount of our own research in city records, in oral histories, so I think Stewart's Cafe was first written about by George Chauncey in his book Gay New York, and so we read about it, and then we used the research there, and we did additional research as well. And that's pretty typical of what we do. And we welcome nominations from people.
Especially in the outer boroughs, right?
Yes, but anywhere. I mean, I just wrote an entry this week for an important housing lawsuit called the Braschi decision, and somebody wrote in, why don't you include Braschi on the site? So we take the nomination seriously.
We're on 10th Street now?
Yes, we've turned onto 10th Street, and we're headed for the corner of 10th and Waverly, where Julius's bar is. And I was going to stand across the street, but it's a construction site. So
well, we can stand kitty corner.
Well, we can stand right in front of the sign that says Julius.
Great. And we're being reminded in the comments by another project co-director, Ken Lusbader, that a lot of the buildings in the area that we're walking today are within the Greenwich Village Historic District. So in addition to being documented on the project website, they have protection as designated landmarks as well.
Yes, that's correct. Everything in Greenwich Village is in an historic district, but we've also been working to get some of the sites recognized individually as landmarks. Like Stonewall is an individual landmark, and so both by the city and last year the city did about 2 years ago, the city did 6 individual landmarks, not all in Greenwich Village, that relate to LGBT history, and we've been getting sites listed on the National Register. We just had the Greenwich Village home where Lorraine Hansberry the great African-American and lesbian playwright, wrote A Raisin in the Sun, which is just a few blocks from where we are now. And so that was just listed on the National Register. So we're really interested in doing that. So let's just go over here. Yeah. And I also should mention that this was, the Sites Project was founded by Ken Lusbader, who just sent in the question, Jay Shockley, and myself, and with a staff that's Amanda Davis and Christiana Pena, who does our social media, and all of us are really steeped in preservation work. So it's a really a group effort.
And for those who want to continue the tour experience after today, we'll put in the description after the live tour today, there's an app you can download called Vamonde, VAMONDE, where we've curated several tours, including the Greenwich Village, so people can follow up for more information there.
Let's just go around the corner. So this is Julius's bar here. This is the oldest gay bar active in New York at the moment. This building dates from the early 19th century. It was probably built with a store at the base, and there was probably a bar here at least by the mid 19th century. The interior, which is largely an early 20th century bar. We can't date it exactly, but stylistically it appears to date from the early 20th century. And this was by the 1930s, during Prohibition, this became a really popular speakeasy and a sports bar, and it attracted newspapermen and sports figures and celebrities, and if you go inside, it's filled with pictures of celebrities and sports figures and horses and from horse racing, and so it was really popular. Then by the 1960s, or by the 1960s, as gay life was really centering in this area, it began to develop into a mixed clientele. So it had both straight and gay clientele here. In 1964, Beth Bryant's The Inside Guide to Greenwich Village noted, in what any gay person would understand exactly what she was saying, she says that it now attracts an amazing quantity of attractive men and theater notables. And at about the same time, there's a book called, there's a book that was written by an author named Petronius, which is clearly a pseudonym, and it's basically a guide to New York, and it has a chapter about LGBT New York. But in the 1960s, you could not get a major press to publish a book that was a positive discussion of queer life in the city. So this chapter is referred to with the sneering title, The Fag World, but it is incredibly knowing. It lists, all the bars and other venues of queer life in New York, and it tells you exactly what they're like. So you knew exactly where you wanted to go. So under the guise of the fag world, it tells you. And so for Julius's, it says that there were couples in the back, mixed, mainly college boys in the front, not always from gay universities, but that way. I love it, that way.
But also,
what's a gay university? Since I teach at Columbia, I'm hoping that Columbia is among those. In 1965, 3 members of the Mattachine Society, led by Dick Leish, along with Craig Rodwell and John Timmons, decided that they were going to challenge the New York State Liquor Authority, which had a rule that the mere presence of a homosexual in a bar was disorderly. So it meant that it was basically illegal to serve a known homosexual a drink, and so they wanted to challenge that. So they organized some newspaper people to come, and they were going to go to a Ukrainian bar in the East Village, and they were going to. And the idea was they would go in and they would say, "Hi, we're homosexuals and we want to drink." So they met the newspaper reporters at the bar on St. Mark's Place, and the newspaper reporters had talked to the bar owner, and he closed the place down. So they had to go someplace else. So they went to Howard Johnson's on 6th Avenue, and they asked to see the manager, announced that they were homosexuals, asked for drinks, and the manager laughed at them and served them. So that didn't work. So they went across the street to a Polynesian bar called the Waikiki, and the same thing happened. They were served. So then they decided that they would come to Julius's, and they thought that this would be a good place because Julius's had been raided a few weeks before, and would be very sensitive to this. So the three of them, with the newspaper reporters in tow, marched to Julius's, went inside, and said, "We're homosexuals and we want to drink." And that resulted in this very famous photograph by Fred McDara, a photographer for the Village Voice.
I'm seeing if I can bring it up.
And Christiana's going to bring it up.
Keep going, I'll bring it up.
Where basically the bartender says, "Well, I can't serve you," so this resulted in two newspaper articles: a really nasty, snide article in the New York Times, and a really great article in the Village Voice, which really talked about this as a kind of adventure with these three members of the Mattachine Society, very well dressed, as was typical of the Mattachine Society's dress code, and then what happened? And so they got the publicity that they wanted, and the state liquor authority was really kind of embarrassed by this and said, "Oh well, we never had a rule that you couldn't serve a known homosexual," which was an out and out lie on their part because they clearly had this rule. And the city's new Human Rights Commission also got interested in this, although sexual orientation was not really something that they, under the law, could deal with at the time. But the publicity was really fantastic, and it leads to the development of the movement to rid the bars of mafia ownership, and leads to the development of gay-owned or gay-welcoming bars, and then how the bar becomes a kind of center of gay life, especially in the 1970s and 80s, without any fear that there was going to be a raid on the bar or that the bar could be closed down. So, on the 50th anniversary of what came to be known as the sip-in, because the idea was based on the sit-ins of the civil rights movement. The Mattachine didn't call it the sip-in, but that's what it came to be known as. On the 50th anniversary, we got this site as our first site to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. If you've never been to Julius's, I highly recommend that you come. It's one of the few bars in New York that still has this great historic atmosphere to it. You can come and have a burger and have a beer, and it's a great place to come. So that is our little Jane's Walk for 2021. I hope you've enjoyed it, and come to one of our actual events, or check out our website. And unless there are any other questions that anybody has posed.
Not now, but please, we're going to post this on our Instagram TV, so please drop your comments, let us know what you enjoyed, let us know other questions you have that come later. And please share.
Yes, and we're happy to answer your questions later.
And we're grateful to Municipal Art Society, who organizes Jane Walks here in New York City, for inviting us to participate. Thanks, Andrew.
A pleasure. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.